All right, here we are. It's Friday, January 28th. With my good friend Gerald Ashley coming in. Where are we finding you, Gerald?
I think I would say London, England, though more precisely.
You would think. You're not sure.
Yeah, well, no, I do know where I am, although it's after lunch. Surrey, leafy Surrey outside London. There you go.
Fantastic. I'm in Old Town Alexandria on the shores of the Potomac River, about 5 miles from the U.S. Capitol, which is still standing, which is positive. So here's the deal. Our plan for 2022 is to do 20, 21 of these. Going to meet every other week, talk kind of global politics, global business, global commerce, culture, whatever we find interesting, and have some fun.
Yeah, sounds good. Why don't we kick off with a nice international thing and wish any Chinese viewers or listeners Kung Hai Fat Choi, which is, of course, Happy New Year. That is the sole amount of my Chinese. And for people who like to have a little bit of drama in their life, it's the Year of the Tiger. And that can be both positive and negative, depending how you want to look at it. So that kind of sets you up there, really, Marc, to take it on from there.
Now, I'm excited for the Year of the Tiger. Hopefully it'll be good fortune. And a week from today, our friends in Beijing will be kicking off the Winter Olympics. I think Beijing is the only city to host both the Winter Games and the Summer Games. So that's kind of exciting.
I kind of like the Winter Games more than the summer ones. So just, there's more kind of action rather than just running around in circles. I kind of like this lunacy of the bobsleigh, and then these.
Yeah, the bobsled is an amazing sport. The luge, these are pretty amazing sports.
And then you've got the total lunacy of is it the luge, which is basically people on a tin tray sliding down some sort of lunatic course, and of course the ski jumping, which is brilliant. So I quite like the Winter Olympics.
Yeah, no, it's actually, for us here in the States, obviously hockey and the downhill skiing and, ice skating is super, super popular in the States, and invariably whatever U.S. American does well,
right,
in the ice skating usually gets on a box of, gets a deal with Procter & Gamble and, starts selling cereal the next day. So the commerce is always interesting.
I can't remember the name of the guy, so I'm in trouble already, but I think Britain's got quite a useful downhill skier this year.
I can't recall his name. Maybe we'll have our research team look into that and post it in the show notes. But he won a big race last week, and I think the first time a Brit has ever won a World Cup downhill ski race in like 50 years or something.
Hopefully it's not one of those one-offs. He apparently is very talented and all the rest of it, but the old excuse used to be it was far too difficult for us to get over to the Alps and practice, which always seemed a pretty weak excuse. But British skiing seems to be getting its act together.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. So it's funny you mentioned that, because even some of the best skiers in the U.S. actually grew up in the Midwest or in the Northeast, in Vermont or New Hampshire, not in the kind of the Rocky Mountains. And I don't know. I don't know how much hill you need to become a good skier, but it seems like you just need to be a bit fearless and head down the hill quickly.
I guess, it's like a lot of these things, you have to start really early. I have vague memories of seeing bits of videotape of Tiger Woods playing at like 4 and 5 years old. So it's, the story or the secret to success is pushy parents, isn't it?
Well, as an aside, I should have been a ski bum. I'd be much more qualified for that, and love to ski and actually think about skiing a lot. And my wife, who grew up in Florida, had never seen snow, let alone a proper ski hill, well into her 30s. And we put her on skis for one day, and that was it. And her classmates in the ski school were 6 and 7 years old. So there's certainly benefits of starting skiing early.
Yeah, it's like music and all these things, I guess. So
that's a good pivot to our first topic, which I've made these flashy cards. Can you see this? This is great. This is great production value.
Good.
So Russia, Ukraine. Suddenly Europe is it's all about Europe. It's all about, I mean, we're living maybe in the 1800s again. What is happening with Russia and Ukraine? Can you sort it out in 2 minutes?
Yeah, there you go. That should be quite straightforward. Well, the first thing to say, it really goes back, I think, to the fall of the Berlin Wall, which is, of course, November, I think, 1989.
1989, correct? Yep.
Basically, we had a frozen world, obviously the Cold War and everything, but everything was very settled. And really the kaleidoscope got shaken up. Obviously, the Soviet Union fell apart. We had a lot of trouble in the Balkans, but nobody really thought so much about Northern and Eastern Europe. But in fact, the history books show us it's a very, very fluid part of the world. I mean, rather astonishingly, maybe to some people, Poland actually disappeared as a country between about 1790 and the end of the First World War, 1918. And various German and Russian armies have marched east and west of one another over hundreds and hundreds of years. And sometimes maybe we sort of feel settled in the world and then everything's in its place. But I think the current events are showing it's much more fluid than that. And few things might be up for grabs.
Yeah, you wonder if we're at a major, geopolitical, world-changing, map-changing inflection point, or is this a lot of bluffing? But I think the map is like spot on. Actually, the only part of Poland I've been to is Gdansk or Danzig, depending on when you're looking at the city. And in fact, I have a great map of Gdansk, a German map, and it's all in, it's called Danzig, which I find, I think it's from the 40s. It's a great map. And just the placement of Poland, Ukraine, going back to the Tsarist Russians, is Ukraine a part of Russia? It's just really fascinating. And
you've got parts of the map now that really are Russia, although they say Belarus on them, for example.
Correct. Yeah. And getting to that, that is an interesting point because, Russia has been in parts of Ukraine for 8 years. And, we've been actually tweeting about this week, and I've been trying to have some fun with this. Like, what is an invasion of Ukraine if a third of Ukraine is already controlled by Russia? Last week Biden had that, point about if it's a minor incursion, that's okay. So, nobody really knows how much of Russia is in Ukraine and how much Ukraine is in Russia and what that means for the world.
No, I agree with you. And I think it's quite difficult to tease out how much of this is just mini tremors or whether or not there's a big explosion coming. If you're negative about things, I think it's the first of many tremors, and it will go bang at some point. Quite what will trigger that, I think, is quite difficult to see. This is suiting Mr. Putin down to the ground, I think. Apart from anything else, he's got the oil price up $10 a barrel since the beginning of the year, which is helping him fund all of this. We must remember the Russian economy is basically one word, well, two words: oil and gas. And and
speaking about and getting back to China, one of my friends this week, who may or may not be a professional spy, it's unclear, but he was telling me that the Russians and the Chinese do have a deal for the Russians to sell gas to China, but he speculates it's at a 30 to 40% discount. That is, even though it's a huge market, the Chinese are not paying the full price that the Europeans are. And, as you rightly point out, Russia's whole economy needs expensive oil to run.
They live off that. They live off that dollar income, and they will exploit that, obviously, to their own advantages. Going back to our map of things going east and west, I wanted to drop in a few comments about Kaliningrad, which, if we look at the old map, is Königsberg, which of course was a very famous city, but that has been, well, I haven't got the full list here in front of me, but it's been Polish, Russian, Prussian, as well as German. And, we've kind of forgotten about Prussia, but it was a very strong and powerful part of the world, and then it joined into the modernization of Germany in the 1850s and 60s. So what's interesting about Königsberg is if you look on the map, it's this sort of strange sort of triangle, like a Kraft cheese shape almost, of the city and a little bit of the Baltic coast. But the key is there's only 40 or 50 miles between the pointed bit of the cheese, if you like, and Belarus. And this is called, I think, the Tsuwalki Gap. I might be mispronouncing.
No, I think that's how you pronounce it. I learned about that this week, actually.
Yeah, and it's, it's a day's drive for any half-decent tank division. I don't see that, and how do I know? But I suspect that's not the immediate threat. But if you are playing a long-term chess game, it's clearly an objective of some sort. And tied into that is Lithuania.
Right.
People think the Baltic states are all quite stable and all sorted. Yes, they are. But Lithuania has not a large, but a very vocal Russian-speaking population between, I think it's 5 and 8%, and they still feel Russian. So if you were looking for a pretext to march in to Lithuania, it would be very easy for Putin to pull that rabbit out of the hat. So plenty to worry about if you want to worry about it.
Conquered in the liberation. One of those moves. And actually, the Swedes apparently moved some troops to an island in the Baltics.
We've all become armchair admirals, haven't we? And so we all know about Gotland now, which I didn't know
exactly
2 weeks ago. It's a key island in the Baltic, and apparently it pretty much controls shipping and any sort of military activity there. And again, I think this is Sweden just moving one of the pawns on the chessboard and kind of making the point.
Yeah, let's go back to like Putin in Ukraine though. Let's game this out like in terms of three things. And I think, well, I'll just throw a thing. I think what you mentioned, the Year of the Tiger, the Olympics, Putin is due to go to Beijing next Friday for the opening ceremony. So I don't suspect he's going to launch an invasion till after the opening ceremony, because it'd be pretty awkward to, I guess, lead a war from Beijing. But what is Putin doing? He's moved all this equipment. He's telegraphed the world that he wants to go in, which doesn't really seem that's how you would do a sneak attack. And there's all these diplomatic meetings going on. I saw today that the Russians and the Brits are going to meet sometime in the next 2 weeks. So it doesn't seem like there's an immediate situation here, but moving all this equipment would suggest that Putin's got to do something, no? Like, won't he have pressure back in Moscow if he doesn't do anything?
I think two things. I think Putin has a strong sense of history, and that goes back to this business of where Russia starts and where it finishes. And it may also be a distraction technique from not a particularly happy situation at home. And in fact, he's got to be a little bit careful because the Russian ruble's been hammered on this. The Moscow Stock Exchange is well down. I know other exchanges are down this year, but Moscow is certainly taking a hit. And so I think he's got a fine line of wanting to promote Russia and Russian interests, and probably most importantly, respect. Because I think there's a great feeling in Russia that they lost a lot of respect after the collapse of the Soviet Union. I mean, who cares about them and all the rest of it? And they just really want to be firmly back on the top table. And I think that's probably their real objective.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think the human behavior, I joke that, national politics is at the federal level here in DC, it's high school, but with nuclear weapons. And I think that just wanting to respect and hanging out with the cool kids is super important. And as we saw, there's a German admiral in India who made that very claim. He said, all they really want is respect. And 24 hours later, he was asked to leave, which is kind of interesting. I want to talk, and that is a good segue, because I want to talk to you about our friends, Germany. What is let me, before I tee this up, I think there's been a lot of talk here in the States about that this is all to do with the horrible exit from Afghanistan. But doesn't this have more to do with a new government in Germany, Merkel being gone, and Putin seeing an opportunity to test this new coalition government in Berlin?
To be honest, I suspect the German administration's a little bit shaky. It's got some very unusual bedfellows in it. You've obviously got the sort of left and the green components, But with the is it the Free Democrats, you've got a sort of Reagan-esque Thatcherite wing, which is very small, but there's some interesting internal tensions in that administration, because you've got one half of the government wants to spend money like water, and the other half actually wants to do the exact opposite. Now, a friend of mine pointed this out to me, and I hadn't thought about it, but I think it's a key factor. Germany, along with most countries in Europe, have proportional representation. And currently, somewhere between 20 and 25% of the German electorate are pro-green in one shape or another. They're very pro, safer planet and environmental stuff and all the rest of it. And they are dead nuts against nuclear power. I think a lot of the rest of the world find this bizarre, but they're dead nuts against it. And this means that they are always going to have to be reliant on other sources of energy.
Right.
Which means Russian oil and gas or German and Polish coal. Now, how bizarre is it that green...
Let me stop you there. We have some friends in Texas that would love to sell LNG to our German friends.
Oh, sure.
Anyways, go ahead.
It's a global market, but it's kind of closer to get it,
for sure.
To get it by pipeline and everything. But you're dead right. LNG is part of that equation. But is it not bizarre that in an effort to sort of clean up the world and be environmentally friendly, you end up burning more coal? And I saw a report this morning that world demand and world consumption of coal in 2021 was the highest it's ever been. So all this talk that it's a dying energy source and we're going to clean up and net zero and all that sort of, I'm afraid to invoke Greta Thunberg, it is blah, blah, blah. It's not the reality of what's going on.
So does that play into Putin's maneuvering too? The fact that you have a more, let's call it a green, more environmentally friendly government in Berlin, and their decision to get rid of nuclear power, that's also a factor in Putin's decision to kind of up the energy, up the heat in that part of the world.
We shouldn't forget Franco-German relations in all of this, because Macron has got the EU presidency for this current 6 months. 6 months that will go quite quickly, obviously, and there's the French elections coming up in not too distant future. But I think Macron sees his opportunity, funnily enough, to exploit the German situation as much. Yeah,
I think him too. They also, I think, hosted a meeting yesterday. It's hard to keep track of all these diplomatic meetings, but I think the French are trying to insert themselves in this situation as well.
Yeah, this is an English view of the French, but they're at it again, aren't they? They're kind of inserting themselves into things. We've had that issue with them for about 800 years, so that doesn't go away.
So do you think that going back, it's funny you brought up the Berlin Wall, 1989. I mean, was this bound to happen eventually? The fact that we haven't really figured out Eastern kind of Central Europe and the Russian idea of being a big superpower has never gone away, even with the wall falling.
No, and I think it's worth thinking about Russia. People say, "Oh, Russia's not very important. Its GDP is only the size of Spain." Well, I think that's more reflection on whether or not GDP is a useful metric, because they've got a lot of things we want, particularly if you include Belarus and Ukraine or parts of it, because you've got all the wheat production and obviously all the natural resources, and they are very significant. They were significant during the times of the Tsars, Catherine the Great, all the rest of it, and that hasn't gone away. So funnily enough, this period from 1989, 1990 through till about really the early days of Putin, say to 2010, with the exception where Russia didn't count for so much. We froze them out of G7 meetings and all this sort of thing.
Right.
I think they're going to barge their way back into the room.
And, it's always good to have an opponent, to have a mission greater than, yourself. And, I think this plays into a lot of political boxes and kind of human behavior, what, Putin is doing here. But I don't know. I really think in some ways, as he overplayed his hand, I think the response by the West, maybe he wasn't expecting it. They're really, ratcheting up the pressure. It's like dominating the news coverage like never before. There's suddenly more German, Ukrainian, Russian experts than I've ever knew possible. I can't imagine moving all that equipment and not doing something with it and taking it back to Moscow.
Isn't it interesting that the West is doing quite well in the information war
the
media war, because the Russians run rings around us on disinformation and all the rest of it. So we seem to have raised our game this time.
No, there is some communication element. I haven't fully thought it through, but just observing it, there's something, nothing happens by accident. And just the amount of attention and just the energy around it, especially because as we started out, going back to the Crimea invasion, the Russians have been there for 8 years, and there's been this kind of skirmish, kind of cold, hot war in eastern Ukraine for well into a decade now. And, suddenly now it's like the most important thing in the world, and just the sharing of the equipment, et cetera. So super interesting.
I sense that the news cycle will move on unless people start firing shots at one another.
That's good. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I saw this great interview. I saw this great interview today. This middle-aged woman, she's in her 50s, and she trains on the weekends to defend Ukraine, and she's a media celebrity. But yeah, the media will move on. Speaking of moving on, let's go to our next topic. Are you impressed by these?
Brilliant.
Oh, let's talk about number 10. PM Johnson, Sue Gray.
There's no news there. Okay. A couple of drinks parties is all quite normal. The whole thing is a complete circus, of course. Depending who you ask and who you believe, this is, one of the most morally reprehensible acts, in human history, or it's so irrelevant, it's laughable. Probably the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think it is true to say that a large part of the British public, or a part of the British public, are disgusted is too strong a word, probably.
Yeah.
But they're not happy about it, because it doesn't play well to this idea that we're all in it together.
Yeah.
And I think that particularly plays badly against a figure like Boris, who, he's got this kind of persona of running roughshod over everything. And I think there's a feeling maybe this time he's kind of gone a little too far. But how all this gets resolved, Lord only knows.
Yeah, I can't take credit for this. I heard this yesterday from William Hague. He was recounting most times when the PM gets booted by the party, it's over policy. But this is strictly personality driven.
Yeah,
it's behavior, personality, lack of integrity.
Well, I know two people.
It's so interesting.
I know two people who've worked with Boris, and they both quite independently and at different times said to me that, I said, well, what's the problem with Boris? Unreliable. And that is I think that's quite a damning thing, really. You can be unreliable and, I'm not surprised if Keith Richards is unreliable, right? That's kind of part of
exactly
what he's supposed to be. But being Prime Minister of Great Britain, really, you have to be you kind of have to play the game a bit more. And I think Boris's personality finds that really hard to do. He's that guy down the bar who wants to have a good time with everybody, crack a lot of jokes, and just jolly on through life, which is great. I'd enjoy his company, I'm sure. But I think it's different when you're running a country.
Well, and it's odd if he has that tendency, which I totally agree. He seems like he'd be a great guy to hang with after like a rugby match. But it seems like his staff is failing him. Like, they're ambushing him with cake, which, by the way, one of the greatest lines I've ever heard ever. The chief of staff is sending out these emails. Nobody around him, part of the job as a staffer is to prevent the worst tendencies of the principal to step in it. And, it's weird that he doesn't have the staff around him to kind of rein him in.
Yeah, because he's a front man, right? And he
right.
Shouldn't be, that's his role. And he kind of, people say, well, Tories will keep him on because he keeps winning elections. Well, he's kind of good at electioneering. And he reminds me of a problem we see in business sometimes. You know, when you hire somebody who's brilliant at the interview, but rubbish at the job. And, you know, I mean, he is clearly brilliant at the interview, but I'm not that certain he's particularly interested in the day job.
No, that line I've heard from you about, you know, Boris will be the best former prime minister the world has ever seen.
I think that's his ambition, is to be a former prime minister and then come over to America and entertain you guys at vast expense. You see, that's his
dream. Yeah, it'd be fantastic. He'll set up residency in Las Vegas at the Caesars Hotel. It'll be fantastic.
Well, let's hope he went to a tape like Adele, you know, bursting into tears because the sound isn't working or some nonsense.
Good inside reference. Getting back to the election though, like, wouldn't anybody have done well against Jeremy Corbyn? And what's the Dominic Cummings factor? I
think you're right. I mean, you could take the very cynical view that Boris was the least worst horse in the abattoir. That, you know, the choice was just so dreadful. And obviously he had a very strong win. But another feature of British politics, and we've had this all the way back to Tony Blair in 1997, is people win and then they don't actually know what they want to do with it. So Blair's first administration, he did virtually nothing. And then the whole Gordon Brown thing blew up. Gordon Brown really meandered around. Cameron was running a coalition, and it was kind of a lot of smooth talk and less action. Mrs. May was sort of fighting for her life almost from day one. And Boris has sailed in, you know, like he's going to rescue everything. He's joined the party slightly late, but don't worry, it's Boris time and we'll all have a lot of fun. And of course, he got hit by the COVID outbreak and all the rest of it. But you couldn't accuse the current British government of having any reforming zeal. There's plenty of things that, if somebody had a reforming bent, could do something with. In fairness to Cameron, he did open up a lot of things like minority rights and some of those things. But we have a tax code that is probably not in the same league as the US one, but it's insane. I mean, it grows every year, and somebody just needs to put a chainsaw through it. But you don't ever hear from a British government they want to shake up the system. In fact, Boris seemed to do the exact opposite.
Yeah, getting back to the policy, let's game this out. I mean, I don't think Boris will, the next election, I think, has to happen by 2025, right? 2024. And I don't think Boris will be at the top of the party, but I'm not sure how he exits. But even if he was to leave in the short term, it does seem like there wouldn't be any policy change, whether it was Susan or...
I don't think there would. There's no clear... I'm going to say there's no clear candidate. There's probably one or two names as possible successors, but it's different from the Mrs. May situation, whereas there was a solid group of people who were determined to get her out, and they did manage to coalesce around Boris. It's not at all certain whether they would coalesce around Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss. So it might be a house slightly divided there, actually.
I mean, that's probably why he's still in power, right? I mean, it would seem to me like if there was a solid decision who was going to be number two, who was next in line, that he would be gone. But
no, there's no. In fact, his official number two is Dominic Raab. He's my local MP, actually. A perfectly decent, nice guy, but I mean, how many people in the street would even recognize him? You know, he has no name recognition.
When the report dropped, I guess the Sue Gray report, the most famous woman, she should probably be prime minister. She's so powerful. Well, I guess that drops. Boris makes a speech. Does he suddenly see Damascus? Like, does he suddenly see Jesus and, pivot and, become a great leader?
We're looking for a trigger point. And one of the trigger points has been the sort of unexploded bomb has been made safe today, because we've got down into the sort of minutiae of whether Sue Gray's report has to come second to a metropolitan police report, and it's all just going into a big, load of blancmange. And I think this could run for many weeks, and that kind of suits Boris. But the next definite trigger point, which he can't control, are local elections in May. And if he does like unbelievably badly, I think then somebody will tap him on the shoulder. So I reckon we stumble on and bumble on through till May, and we just have to see what the great British electorate think. And if it's a massive thumbs down, the Tory party, one of their main hobbies is regicide. They always enjoy chopping people out. I mean, they chop Mrs. Thatcher without a bat of an eyelid. So I don't think it would be, it's in their DNA to get rid of people they don't think are going to win.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Tory party is exceptional at staying in power. Like their number one job is to stay in power. It doesn't really matter who's at the top, what the policy is. That's just my vision from the outside. They just seem to be like, okay, this is not working. We want to stay in power.
They kind of flex around. You could not say that the current administration is the same as one under Margaret Thatcher. I mean, you could say in many ways Boris is poles apart from Mrs. Thatcher. And of course, that's the one wing of the Tory party. It's why they don't like it. But all to play for. But I think we can pick through the wreckage in May on this one.
Fantastic. Well, let's bring it back stateside. Here we go. Joe Biden.
I didn't see that.
For the United States.
Oh, yeah. Oh, right.
Here we go. Yeah, Joe Biden. So the Supreme Court nomination, I don't want to bore our listeners, especially our listeners in China, with the process, but it's quite political. Usually goes on for 60 to 90 days, millions of op-eds, tons of cable news time. It's a huge fight. It's a big deal, a lot of attention. But this could be a real opportunity, looking as we're talking about like an inflection point or a pivot for Joe Biden to really assert himself and really get his base excited by this pick. So the timing of this, I don't think was by accident, by any stretch of the imagination. We have a real opportunity for Joe Biden to make the case and pacify the progressives in his party and make a bold pick for the Supreme Court and get everybody ginned up and excited. There's
this sort of view that Supreme Court judges seem to live forever. So if you appoint one, even in their 50s or 60s, you might have a 20 or even 30-year run.
Absolutely, it's the best job in Washington D.C. without a doubt, and and I think anybody who's going to be anybody that Joe Biden nominates will easily be in their late 40s, early 50s. So as you rightly point out, they'll be on the bench for 30, 40 years possibly. That's absolutely the case.
But the balance stays the same, does it, Marc? Are we still?
Yeah, so we're at 6-3 now. But Roberts, who's the head guy there at the Supreme Court, tends to side a bit more with the liberals. But the breakdown is it'll still be 6-3, which is important because it doesn't seem like there'll be much change in the rulings in the short term. But the opportunity for Joe Biden to nominate somebody he's saying he's going to nominate a black woman, which would be historic for a number of reasons. Is pretty exciting, but it just gives you a huge opportunity. There's some discussion that the Roe v. Wade, the abortion choice issue could be decided this summer, which equally is important going into the midterms. But this is a real opportunity. I mean, what's interesting, Joe Biden could possibly have a really good year of the Tiger. Maybe he does. Maybe he's playing Ukraine right. Maybe he gets the nomination right, and maybe he really asserts himself on the global stage. Quite interesting because he's had a horrible first year.
Yeah, no, I get that, and his ratings have been dreadful and all the rest of it. One thing that strikes me, though, that as a politician, when people are suggesting you reset, this is the kiss of death. If you have to say, oh, don't worry, we didn't do very well in the first half, we're really going to get our act together. That is actually quite a hard trick to pull off, isn't it? I mean, there have been examples of people who have come back. One always thinks of Bill Clinton when he was on the campaign trail as a comeback kid. But in this day and age now, this sort of hyper media age, any hint of trouble, and you become the news, or your role becomes the news rather than the policy, isn't it? So yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I think in the UK we have a personality situation. Here in the States we have a policy situation, and there's just a lot of energy suggesting that the Republicans will take over the House of Representatives in the midterm election. But so maybe reset is not the right word. Re-energizing or giving,
No, that's
basically
a marvelous spin on that. I very very impressed. So we can all.
The DNC should send me, the Democrat National Committee should send me a check. But looking at it in some ways, the first year has been a bit of a slog because it's been focused on COVID, Build Back Better, kind of minutia. But there's nothing better to generate interest than a Supreme Court nomination, I think, in terms of getting your base excited about you being in office.
And is there any sense that Biden, I think you put up a tweet a few weeks ago, noting how many days to go before he had to put his nomination in. Do you think?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is, I think what people aren't really, nobody's talking about that I know of, but February 4th of 2024 or February, give me one of the 2 days, say February 2nd, February 4th, 2024 is the first vote in Iowa, right? The Iowa caucus.
Oh, and the whole thing starts again.
The primary starts in 2024. So if you're going to run for president, you're going to announce in 23, which is a year from now. So
we're talking autumn 23. Was that a kind of...
Exactly. After I think even by the January, just because of fundraising and kind of clearing the field, you'll have people after the midterm election in November, December, say that they're going to run for president in 24, because the process really starts a year out. So what I'm saying to you is I think Biden's going to have to decide at the latest by March of 2023 whether or not he's going to actually run for president again, because just like the Tory party does not like to not be in power, the Democrats also don't like to be in power. And I don't think they're going to want to enter, an election year without knowing what the hell's going on. So, I think Biden has a year to decide what the hell he's going to do.
Yeah. So no chance of having a wildly young president in their 60s then, by the sounds of things, is it?
I think what happens, I think Biden actually, I think he announces his retirement in
You'll bow out.
23, puts in Harris. She brings in a younger vice president, and we go that way. But that's my prediction. But you can't, if you're president, you can't announce you're going to be a lame duck. So.
Oh no, that's the problem, isn't it? The moment you do that. Yeah. This is, I think, happened to a few British prime ministers. They've said, "Oh well, I won't fight the next general election." And they're kind of dead overnight. The power just keeps away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In some ways, getting back to our friends in China, like Xi Jinping is facing the same thing. The fact that he's suggesting
isn't a general view. If he only gets the 5-year rollover, he hasn't actually achieved what he really wants to do. Is he trying to go for a lifetime kind of?
Yeah, he wants the lifetime because he doesn't want the lame duck situation, because just like we have factions in the West, they have factions in the East. And if she's saying I'm done, somebody in Shanghai will be like, well, I want to be president of China. So the factions are very interesting. But I think, Joe Biden has a big year ahead of him.
Right.
All right, let's wrap it up. Reading and writing.
I didn't see that one. I didn't get the inside track on that.
Reading and watching.
Reading and watching. Okay.
What are we reading? What are we watching? Do you want to go first?
Well, yeah.
We should tell our viewers, we're going to, at the end of every show here, we're going to, provide insights on our voluminous media diet.
Yeah, misleading, favorable reviews, probably. Well, a guy who I only came across a few years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, Australian guitarist called Tommy Emmanuel. He is absolutely stunning. He's of an age. He's not a youngster. He's probably in his 50s, I think now, maybe slightly older. But he is just a brilliant acoustic guitar player. And that well-known US tune, Classical Gas, I would recommend if you just tap in classical gas, Tommy Emmanuel into YouTube, he will blow your socks off. There you go.
Whoa, that's a bold statement.
Well, I'm confident in it. In terms of other things, well, I'm starting on a very long book called The Silk Roads by a chap called Peter Frankopan.
Yeah.
He's an Oxford academic. It's a 600-page job. And it's basically, he's just recasting a lot of what we've been talking about, recasting the kind of view of the world and not putting the center of the world in the past at the Mediterranean, but shifting it much further to the east, the so-called Silk Road. And he's put it in the plural because he's looking at things like not just trade, but religion, politics, technology, all this stuff. I think it'll be a good read, and keep me quiet for a while.
No, I think it's. I know very little about that part of the world. In fact, even this week, one of the things I watched it was a BBC documentary about Vienna, which I've only been to Innsbruck. I haven't made it all the way across Vienna, which I hear it's beautiful. But the Habsburgs, I didn't literally. I've heard about them, but no idea. 1,000-year reign and just the Ottoman Turks, and they're at the center of the world. The Vienna Congress.
Is that Simon Sebag Montefiore? I think was the guy who did it. Again, in his show notes, he's written some brilliant history books in general.
But in some ways, it's all coming together with Ukraine, Eastern Europe. It's still, we like to think. It's funny you mentioned the Silk Road because we like to think we're living in modern times. We're dealing with the metaverse, NFTs, all this kind of crazy stuff. But yet we're still dealing with, you could say, the Vienna Congress, or we're still dealing with Silk Road trading routes.
Some of these things never go away. We touched on the Balkans earlier for a moment, and one of the big divides in the Balkans is the split of the Roman Empire.
Yeah,
the fact that it split into East and West, and then the East went to a slightly different form of Christianity, and then of course they went to follow Islam and all the rest of it. But the kind of tectonic plates where they kind of split is where the East and West of the Roman Empire split. And we're talking, 1,500 years ago.
Right. We're still dealing with that. I'm reading this book called Algorithms to Live By, which is quite interesting.
That sounds a fun read.
It's actually it's all about algorithms, as you would imagine, and various theories and various formulas.
All right.
But it's really interesting how I'm not a computer scientist, but obviously you always hear about algorithms and whatnot, but literally how computer scientists have to decide what algorithms to use to kind of run our lives and decisions they make, how much information they're going to capture. It's been quite interesting. And getting back, it's interesting you mentioned the new music because one of the opening chapters talks about exploring versus exploiting. So, I know what music I like to listen to. Should I exploit that knowledge, keep listening to it? But we're in this battle to be like, I want to find new music. I want to explore for new stuff. It's a really good book.
Yeah, this is an area I'm really interested in because I think this is sort of digital versus analog. And my kind of view is that digital is a bit sterile because it really looks at past data. That's a very generalized way of looking at it. And if you're looking for new ideas or just chance or serendipity or whatever, it pretty much happens in the analog world. Now, digital is making the running because it makes life more efficient, but it doesn't really come up with new stuff. I haven't heard, anything new from digital.
Yeah, and getting back to the algorithm, would YouTube Music serve me up acoustic music from Australia? Probably not likely, but hearing it from you, having a face-to-face conversation, hearing about it, word of mouth, it's still a very powerful technology. Recommendations, humans saying, hey, I like this, check it out.
AI, has it ever come up with a new recipe for cooking? I don't know. I mean, there doesn't seem anything very creative in it. It may be very good at telling me the best way to scramble my eggs or the the precise quantities of yellow oak and white part of the egg, but I don't see it necessarily going to come up with a new dish based on eggs. I may be wrong. I think this is the challenge. I think people who are going on a lot about AI and all this digital stuff have to deliver something that is genuinely new rather than a more efficient version of what's actually old. There you go.
Yeah, because you got to keep that venture capital gravy train going. All right, Gerald, this was great. I'm sure we'll be picked up in my favorite broadcasting channel, RAI, right? The Italian news outlet.
You mentioned them. Are you hoping to get a gig in Rome at some stage?
I'm hoping to get a gig in Rome. Absolutely. Whatever. I'm hoping to be the correspondent for.
We need to do a lot of product placement, so I need to go off and decide which products I have a T-shirt on next time with my favorite product.
Exactly. Yeah. You can buy this space here, by the way. I'm willing to sell this.
This is available at the moment. Yeah, exactly. Good stuff.
All right, Gerald, thank you very much. That was great. We'll see you in 2 weeks. At the Olympics will be going on. It'll be the year of the tiger. And I suspect we'll still be talking about Boris and still be talking about the Ukraine.
I think you're right. It's been great fun. Thank you.